Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the fourth part of What If Minato Yeeted Himself and His Son into the World of Demon Slayer. Credit goes to SapavemLasae. Chapter 13. Training ensues, word on the wind. Hiroko takes a deep and shuddering breath. She's curled up on her futon, trying to ignore the steady thump of footsteps as the adults move through the house. The door is closed but not locked, light filtering through the gaps at the bottom. Her eyes trace their shadows and listen to the bitter words traded between Jigoro and Minato. She winces when Minato snaps at the man again. She's sure she understands why they are fighting, but she doesn't like it. Her eyes shift over her wounds, wrapped with wisteria and giving off a sickly sweet smell. She hates this too. Naruto is asleep on the futon in the corner and Kyojuro is next to him, curled around the tired boy. The adults are running around and Hiroko can't help but feel her chest twist painfully. She can still see the demon with her mother's hair and face, can still see its twisted expression, and feel Naruto shaking against her. Everything kept escalating until it spiraled out of control and now, she can only sit with her legs wrapped around her knees. She wants nothing more than to curl into a ball and disappear. It's too much. This quiet room, the shouting voices, and the ache from earlier. She wants to escape, wants to breathe freely when she only feels like she is choking here. She twists, jerking to her feet as she darts out of the room. It's too quiet and she just keeps thinking about how Kyojuro and Naruto nearly died, how they nearly died because of her. Her fingers dig into her skin but she stops herself because drawing blood was the reason this all occurred in the first place. She twists around the Ingawa and pulls herself up the pillar, twisting and using her arms to tug herself up onto the roof. She ignored the stinging in her wrist and how it brings tears to her eyes. It's only sprained, she can deal with it. She has painkillers running through her anyway, so the stinging pain is much more bearable. She knows that Jigoro wouldn't want her using it like this regardless, but she is too angry at herself to care. Hiroko shudders as the cool air covers her and curls into a ball. She's overlooking the compound as she hugs her legs to her chest. She had nearly gotten her two new friends killed. She was supposed to be the eldest, supposed to take care of and protect the boys. She had more training than both of them and she was skilled in other areas. Her mind flashes back to Naruto, to how small he had looked as he clung to his father and her throat closes up. She thinks of the face of the demon again, of her mother's face. She hasn't seen her mother in months. She never will again past that demon using her face and it burns a hole deep in Hiroko's chest as she stews in that realization. Her eyes are filling with tears again and she can't quite hold them in as they spill over her cheeks. She's so tired and scared. She misses her mother terribly and not even Jigoro's soft words and gentle encouragement could fill the gap that was left in her absence. Hiroko doesn't think anything could fill that gap. I don't think Jigoro meant the roof when he told you to go rest. A voice calls and Hiroko jerks to it. She's always been so acutely aware of her surroundings and herself, but this time she is neither as she stumbles and nearly falls off the roof. A hand grabs her shoulder gently as it keeps her from falling. Another gently tugs her up and back to her original spot as she looks at the figure. It's Naruto's dad, Minato. She shudders and feels another rush of grief and of guilt. She had nearly taken away this man's son. "Hey, what's wrong?" he murmurs, and she realizes with a start that the man is crouched next to her, his hand cupping her face gently as he rubs her tears away. She looks into his kind blue eyes and stills as she realizes that he is worried about her. His brow is furrowed and he sinks down to sit next to her as her breath hiccups. She's been learning total concentration breathing and has been trying to use it outside of training, but that all goes out of the window when she sees just how much this man cares about her when she nearly got his son killed. "I am so sorry," Hiroko manages as the tears increase. Minato's eyes soften and he carefully reaches around her as she begins to shake. When she doesn't pull away, he tugs her into an embrace. She only cries harder as she presses her face into the fabric of his uniform. "Hey, that wasn't on you," he tries, murmuring quietly into her hair as she shakes her head frantically. She's shaking even more now as she denies him. "I almost got them killed. I was so stupid and careless and I got hurt and my stupid blood drew those demons right to us. I couldn't even fend them off and let Naruto or Kyojuro get away." Hiroko snaps, her voice rough as she relays what has been plaguing her behind her tears. Her hands are fisted in Minato's shirt. He stills and then sighs. He shifts and reaches down to grab her hands gently. She winces and he relaxes his grip on her injured wrist until his fingers barely brush the skin. Her head rises to meet his as he offers her a calm and caring smile. "That's not on you, it really isn't. Kyojuro told me you caught Naruto from falling and I appreciate that. Yes, bad things happened, but you tried your hardest. You held those demons off long enough that we could get there and that means so much more than you know," Minato calmly explains. Hiroko tenses and her eyes narrow as her sadness melds into anger. "I did nothing. It would have been better if I had just let the demons," she starts, and Minato sighs as he tugs her back into his chest. His hands comb against her hair and her breath rushes from her lungs as he speaks to her. "Do you really think it would have helped if you let them take you?" he asks quietly, something underlying his tone. Hiroko stutters and she loses her fight as she slumps. I just want to stop. I don't want to keep causing trouble and endangering everyone around me." Minato huffs and settles back against the roof as he runs a calming hand through her hair. "Is this about what happened, or is this about how you ended up with Jigoro?" he asks, his mind whirling. He has a pretty good idea of the answer after observing the girl. Minato knows how people work. He knows that some people just handle grief differently. Holding Hiroko close, he understands that Hiroko is very much one of those people who bury it under their skin until they can't and it explodes. He thinks of what Jigoro told him and what Kyojuro relayed to them about what just happened. He thinks of the woman the demon had taken the face of when he arrived, of the pale hair and calm brown eyes that gazed at him with hunger. He thinks about how Hiroko looked so much like the woman and he can gather just enough to assume the worst. Jigoro had said her mother became a demon. He didn't say how it happened. Hiroko is hurting and this situation reminded her of something else and stirred up enough of those memories for her to be trapped in her guilt. "What happened?" he murmurs quietly after she stills. She is still shaking but her hands aren't clenched and her breathing halts before it starts again. She takes stuttering breaths as she tries to get a hold of herself. Hiroko shudders and murmurs against his chest, "I got them killed. I was being so stupid. I got hurt and I was bleeding and someone offered a hand but she winces and lets out a terrified laugh that is broken and bitter. He had pretty eyes. He offered me a hand, and even though my friends kept telling me not to, I was going to take his hand. My mother stepped in before I could. She pulled me away, and for some reason, he didn't move into the sun despite the fact that he got angry. He was trying to have her hand me over. She whispers and her voice breaks again as she grips his chest again. Hiroko says nothing and Minato continues to comb his hands through her hair as he thinks. Jigoro had mentioned the demon he saw in passing. A demon strong enough to be considered an upper moon. Jigoro had called his eyes prismatic, and well, Minato has a lingering suspicion now. She took me and ran. She kept telling me not to say a word. I didn't notice at the time, but she was wrapping me in her scarf. It smelled like wisteria. Hiroko says, and her hands inch up to touch the very same scarf she had wrapped around her neck. It barely helps with the cold, but Minato's closeness is fixing that. It stinks of wisteria like the rest of her. She still hates the smell. Her eyes unfocus as she recalls the rest. She ran and she was shouting. She took me to the docks and shoved me into a boat and unwrapped the rope. She told me to stay quiet and kept rubbing my cut with the scarf even when I told her it hurt. She just kept. Hiroko shudders and lets out a sad sound. She curls into a tight little ball and Minato begins to hum softly as he cards his hand down her hair. She takes a deep breath, then another, and another until she is falling into the realm of total concentration again. She left me there on the lake. It got so cold. I was waiting for her to come back, but she didn't. Gigi found me after everything was done. No one survived. None of my friends, none of the little kids who. She strangles her voice with another rising sob. Minato hums a little louder as she buries her face in his chest. I got them killed, Hiroko tells him so softly he almost doesn't catch it. Minato shakes his head and voices his thoughts. You did nothing. You were not the one who hurt them, the demon was. Your blood isn't a curse, Hiroko. It's unfortunate, but it's a part of you. That doesn't make you bad. That doesn't mean you got them killed. They stew in silence as Hiroko listens to his humming and ponders his words. She's so tired that the control of her breathing falters again and she slumps against him. I don't want to be a Marichi, she whispers to him quietly. Minato doesn't reply as she falls asleep against him. He lets out a heavy sigh when her breathing evens out and looks down at the little girl. He's angry at Jigoro again. It's obvious the man had brushed over what had happened and let it slide enough times that Hiroko never got to let it out. He understands where the Hashira is coming from, but it doesn't stop the bitter ache in his chest. He's seeing Kakashi in this little girl, seeing it in the way they both came back from those they cared for dying and saw their blood on their hands. He sees Kakashi's bitterness and insistence that he was bad luck. He sees Hiroko's hate for herself and well, they match far too well. His mind begins to work. He's wondering how he can keep this little girl safe because he acknowledges that just like Kyojuro, just like his son, he cares about Hiroko. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to her or Kyojuro, just like he wants to protect Naruto. Kushina would accuse him of having a bleeding heart, but she would be smiling as she helped him. She would love that even after all this time he still had the ability to care about others as he did. She's struggling. Shinjiro voices as he walks over the other edge of the roof. His eyes are on Hiroko and Minato lets out a sigh as he continues to hold the girl close. He gives her one more look and then glances at Shinjiro. Wouldn't you? You grow up as a normal kid with the wonders of the world around you. Maybe you are aware that the world can be cruel, maybe you aren't. Either way, you aren't prepared for the idea that your very presence can put people in danger. You aren't ready to face a world without your parent at your back or your support system, and the whole reason, at least in your mind, that they aren't there is because of you. Minato murmurs and feels his chest ache again. There's a good chance he is projecting a bit, but he understands. Outside of Kakashi, Minato has also felt multiple times that his presence is a curse to those near him. The only person he cared about back then whom he knows is alive and safe is Naruto, and even then, he's been in so much danger since Minato met Shinjiro. Minato isn't quite strong enough to protect them all. He isn't quite strong enough to quell their fears and silence their worries, even though he wants to more than anything else. He can't fight the self-loathing they have without also facing his own, and he isn't quite sure he wants to yet. I suppose that's a rather apt description, Shinjiro says and settles down next to Minato. They sit quietly as Minato unseals his cloak from his scrolls. It settles over Hiroko's shoulders as she sleeps soundly against him. Minato hums in agreement. I understand the feeling well. I made a choice that resulted in the death of my wife and my son fearing for himself. I made a choice that turned me into a monster, and I'm not sure I can forgive myself or trust myself not to hurt those around me ever again. Minato says quietly as he looks at the sky. He can see the night stars and can feel the rolling tide of the Kyuubi below his skin. He doesn't need to look at Shinjiro to know the man is watching him carefully. Is that what that red haze was? Shinjiro asks quietly. Minato doesn't answer, but Shinjiro understands. Sometimes silence is the easiest answer. Well, for what it's worth, without that monster, we wouldn't have saved those kids and I might have died to that demon. Shinjiro finally says, turning to face the sky as well. Minato jerks his head at the man, feeling something rush through him. He eyes Shinjiro, waiting for any sign that the man was joking or wasn't serious. He gets none and Minato has to let out a bitter laugh as he faces the sky again. Yeah, I guess even as monsters have our uses, Minato says quietly, and they sit in silence. They sit there for a few hours more before Minato decides to come down with Hiroko. He sets her next to his son and nearly stumbled when Naruto reaches for him. Huffing at the boy, he drapes his cloak over the three and they curl closer together. Minato spends a week at Jigoro's home. He transports Shinjiro back home while Naruto, Kyojuro, and himself remain at the house. Ever since the attack, Kyojuro and Naruto refuse to leave Hiroko, and when she tries to apologize to them, she ends up with a pile of blondes who take her to the ground. Minato pretends to not notice how she starts crying again and lets the boys do what they can to help her adjust. He focuses instead on learning from Jigoro. They still don't see eye to eye. Minato accepts the gruff apology Jigoro gives him for his behavior regarding the kids and thanks him for helping Hiroko. Minato still stews in his anger over how the girl feels and how she struggled with it alone. They fall into a routine during the week. Minato learns as much as he can about the forms alongside Hiroko. He catches some of her quirks and enjoys teaching her more about sword skills than just the forms of thunder breathing. He starts to teach the kids more about chakra too. He figures that after the last incident it's best if he gets them started early. Hiroko and Kyojuro are quick learners and really good students and catch on to chakra control rather quickly. Naruto doubles down, asking for more and more as he sees Kyojuro and Hiroko sail past him. His eyes are filled with a stubborn determination that Minato knows is from his mother. Something warm settles in Minato's chest and he finally gives in to teaching Naruto as much as he can about his chains and how to use them to protect himself and others. Nothing offensive at the moment, just enough defensive techniques to keep them safe. Minato isn't ready to see his son wield a sword, not when he is so young. Hiroko takes to tree climbing well. She is flexible, even more so than other kids, because of her mother's teaching. She had learned a lot of skills from her mother, who guided her on aerial silks, performances, contortion, and even knife throwing. It had been a surprise when the girl opened up to him just a bit more about her life before she came to Jigoro. She told him how her mother would fly on her silks and how they earned money in her performances. Hiroko told him how she wanted to learn to be like her mother and gave him a sad smile as she recalled her traits. Minato gathered that her mother was a performer, likely from a group that would have been called a circus in his world. Her mother was a foreigner who had been brought to Japan by some horrible people but was rescued by Hiroko's father, a native of the area. It explained how Hiroko bore both foreign and Japanese features. Hiroko was now showing him one of the dances her father taught her mother. It was so incredibly familiar that Minato had stopped practicing to watch as Hiroko shifted her feet along the ground and showed him the style. It was elegant, and even though Hiroko messed up and had to redo some parts, and it even looked like she forgot some moves entirely, Minato recognized the dance. That reminds me of the Uzumaki ritual dance. My wife showed me it once, but it was to do with the goddess of storms that they followed, Minato tells her when she finishes, his brow furrowing. How odd was it that some things were mirrored in this world? Minato wasn't sure what to think of the idea of a traditional Uzumaki dance he had only seen his wife perform existing in this world as well. Hiroko peers at him with bright eyes and nods her head. Ka-san said To-san taught it to her before he passed away. He mentioned he had a friend who taught it to him, one with red hair, she says, and then shifts back into her stances. She's wielding a practice sword now, and she's trying to find a way to incorporate the style into a combat form. Minato watches her as he stews in his thoughts. A man with red hair taught her father the dance. He was finding more and more coincidences as time passed. Perhaps there was more overlap than he had initially thought. He shifts over and guides Hiroko to correct her posture. She continues and even utilizes some of the chakra control he taught her as she practices building force by whipping through a kick and bringing her blade down after. The arc her blade forms cuts through the air with a spark of lightning. She's young, but Minato recognizes the talent that is there. After training under her mother so she could one day take up the practice of aerial silks, the girl had honed her body. She had more muscle than kids her age should, and she was acutely aware of each limb. To-san. A call drags Minato's thoughts to his son. Kyojuro is following the boy after finishing their round of chores. Hiroko finishes her forms and greets them both happily. She's having an easier time now with both boys being so accepting of her. Naruto's status as a Marichi seemed to help a lot too. Minato sheathes his blade and catches his son, hauling him up to hug him tightly. The boy giggles and presses his face to Minato's as he cheers. Kyo managed to walk on water. He cheers, mindful of his volume since he is so close to Minato's ears. Minato chuckles and ruffles his hair before setting the boy back down. That's incredible. Congrats, Kyojuro, Minato says and grins at the boy. Kyojuro's hair fluffs, almost like a bird would, and he grins brightly at them. It was hard, but I managed. Hiroko manages a whistle and she giggles at the expressions her friends get when she does. She leans in and her face is almost nose to nose with Kyojuro's. He goes bright red as she teases him. Better than how you took to tree climbing, I swear Gigi gets really jumpy every time you enter the room now. Minato hums, recalling near the beginning of the week when he taught the kids how to walk up trees. Kyojuro had walked up the wall and hung upside down in the foyer and scared Jigoro bad enough that Minato had to stop the man. Minato suspected that the boy did it on purpose with how giddy he and Naruto were. They had possibly realized that Minato was still annoyed with the Hashira despite his efforts to let it go. Jigoro certainly realized the boy's plans after multiple pranks occurred. Since then, wall walking and other shinobi techniques were forbidden in the house. Jigoro gave the fiery boy a stink eye every time he practiced. Hiroko pulls away from Kyojuro, fearing she'll make him pass out if she keeps teasing him. He's still bright red, almost as red as his hair. He jolts when Naruto jabs his side. The youngest has a bright grin as he looks between the two. Hiroko has already turned to Minato though, chattering about the next step in their training with chakra. Minato winks at Kyojuro and the boy goes red again, but he quickly gets enthralled by Minato's next sentence. "We could start you on some other weapons training too. I'm not really okay with teaching you any elemental techniques, so we will only go as far as chakra control for those. Maybe kunai would be good, then you could carry around one of my kunai," Minato says and places a hand under his chin as he debates. Hiroko grins at the idea. "I can throw knives, so kunai shouldn't be too hard to get used to," she cheers. Kyojuro nods, eyes wide at the idea. He had always trained to use a katana and never thought about learning how to use other weapons. After watching Minato spar with his father, he was more inclined to learn. Minato reached out and patted Naruto on the head as the boy was about to cheer. "You won't be learning weapons training for some time, Naruto. You are quite young still. I'm not against getting you started with seals instead if you would want to learn," Minato says to dissuade the boy from pouting. Naruto nods eagerly, now placated at the idea of learning seals. They weren't the easiest and he knew not many saw them as interesting, but he wanted to learn. Something about the swirling lines and patterns drew his interest. He wanted to know more. Hiroko glances at him and then looks at Kyojuro. Kyojuro steps forward and draws Minato's attention. "Could we learn as well?" he asks. Minato blinks, eyes wide. He hadn't expected the other kids to be interested. Then again, having knowledge of seals would up their defensive capabilities and it would aid them in protecting others from demons. The barrier seal would be good if he keyed it to excessive yin chakra. Just the thought of it has him agreeing. "That would be amazing. I would love to teach you," Minato tells them, smiling brightly. It reminds him of Kushina teaching his guards as much as she could. She was incredibly good at teaching seals despite appearances. She had taught Jiraiya a good bit too. "How about we focus on food first, Minato, brats," Jigoro calls from his home. All three small blonde heads swivel and then make a run for the house where the smells of fresh food are wafting from. The Hashira catches Minato's gaze and then gruffly catches Hiroko by her shoulder as he tells her and the boys to wash up. He ruffles her hair as she passes, drawing a laugh. Minato walks to the house and removes his shoes to place by the kids' footwear. He takes a seat opposing Jigoro as the man sets the table. Naruto and Kyojuro pile into their seats first, laughing and just having fun. Jigoro lightly chides them to settle at the table and they both listen. They still prod at one another but they make sure to keep their playfulness light. Hiroko arrives last, which is an odd occurrence. Minato can't remember her ever taking this long to get to the table. It becomes apparent why she took so long when she comes into view with a bird on her fingers. She is talking to it, and to Minato's surprise, it's replying. "Inari, hello pretty. It's been some time. Have you come with news from Hattori-san?" She questions. The bird, a crow Minato recognizes, replies, "Master Hattori sends his regards and a letter." Quote, Hiroko pets its feathers as she sits at the table. The bird hops to Jigoro as he holds out his hand, taking the letter dropped into his palm. Inari flutters back to Hiroko's side, taking residence on her shoulder. He caws and Hiroko reaches up to continue stroking his feathers. Jigoro reads the note and hums. Hattori is on his way here. He managed to get some free time and decided to see what all the excitement was about. He should be here soon, Jigoro says and sets the note down as he tells the boys to dig in. Neither Naruto nor Kyojuro needs to be told twice. They both dig in with vigor as Hiroko giggles next to them. She grabs some of her nuts and offers them to the bird who happily eats them from her fingers. Minato watches in awe, having not seen one of the crows before. Demon Slayers are assigned a crow when they become active members. Hattori's crow is Inari, and I have one named Hisagi. He's currently running a message to Sakanji for me, but I'll introduce you when he returns, Jigoro tells Minato. He asks Hiroko to pass some of the food and she hands it over as she coos as the bird adoringly. They know how to talk? Minato asks in between bites. He's still eyeing the bird as it fluffs happily and rubs against Hiroko's fingers. He can immediately tell whom the bird likes the most. Jigoro nods, but this time it's Hiroko who speaks as she finishes a bite of fish. Kasugai crows are trained by the Kikuchi on how to talk and relay messages. There are some who are not crows even, but mostly crows are used because of how smart they can be. Inari is incredibly smart even for a Kasugai crow, Hiroko informs him. Her eyes sparkle and Jigoro watches her fondly. Don't spoil the bird, Hiroko. He teases as she offers some of her fish to him. Her face flushes darkly but she nods her head and hides her flushed face. Naruto leans over and grins at the crow. It reminds me of the toads and Pakun, Tusan. He cries out happily. There's a pause and Hiroko tilts her head. Toads? And Pakun? She says inquisitively as she looks between Naruto and his father. Naruto nods his head and begins to gesture wildly. Yeah. Toads as big as houses, some the size of a horse. Tusan can summon them. And Pakun is a puppy. He's a friend and he lets me feel his paws. Naruto begins to rant, going so fast that he has to take a big gulp of air. Minato chuckles and leans past Hiroko to pat his son's head. Kyojuro guides the boy to breathe as he shifts in his spot. Minato hums and looks down at his hand. Summons are creatures with the ability to talk. They have more chakra than normal, which allows them to either grow larger than normal or have other abilities. My summons were toads, though I'm not sure if I can summon them still. Pakun was a puppy of a student of mine who raised ninja hounds and trained them. Jigoro nods and tilts his head at the crow. Inari has hopped over to land on Minato's hand and is peering at him inquisitively. Minato offers him some of his fish and the crow takes it before retreating back to Hiroko to settle in her hair. She giggles but lets him, even funneling chakra to keep the bird in place as she eats. Minato begins to ponder the idea of the birds and summons. He hadn't summoned the toads or even tried to since he arrived in this world. It made him wonder if he could. He finished his food and rose to his feet. "Excuse me, I want to check something," Minato told them as he waved at his son and inclined his head to Jigoro. Jigoro nodded but set his food down to follow. Minato stepped outside and made sure he was a good distance from the house before he began channeling chakra. He slammed his palm into the ground, calling out, summoning jutsu. Quote, "There was a puff of smoke, a winding haze that made him cough as he waved it away, and then." Chapter 14. Unbidden questions, stirring emotions. Minato looked at the ground, his eyes wide. He had been a little scared when he attempted to summon the toad, worried that it might work or that it would cause problems. As he looked at the smoke, he felt himself relax. Minato huffed and sighed as he felt the gazes of more than just Jigoro on him. Hiroko was smooshed between Naruto and Kyojuro as they watched them from the shogi door, while Jigoro was quickly approaching. There was nothing there. No spark of chakra or sign of the summon that should have been brought to his side. It takes a moment to settle the disappointment that Minato feels. "Toussaint?" Naruto asks as he runs next to him. Minato looks down and smiles gently. "Sorry, Naruto just wanted to see if you could see Gamakichi again." "I don't think it's going to happen," he speaks. Naruto blinks but smiles at Minato. "That's okay. I have Hiroko ne and Kyojuro ni, and you, and Jigoro Oji, and..." The boy starts. But Minato feels his chest swell with warmth as he reaches down to lift his son into his arms. The 5-year-old giggles and laughs in his grasp. He enjoys the hug before he is set down. Hiroko and Kyojuro are watching Minato carefully. "I'm sorry you don't get to see them again, Minato-san," Hiroko tells him gently. Her gaze shows her understanding and she reaches out to offer him a hand. Kyojuro nods and takes his other hand as they tug him back inside. Jigoro files in after them, watching as Minato thanks the kids and relaxes in their comfort. Minato takes the offer. They may be kids but all three of them are learning to read him well enough that they can tell what he needs. Naruto and Kyojuro are even more so than Hiroko, but she's getting there. Only when he is seated and settled do the kids decide to go back to what they were doing. They stay inside but Kyojuro and Naruto both have to go outside when they grow too restless. Hiroko debates going with them but she is incredibly curious so she remains next to Minato as Jigoro takes a seat at the table opposing them. The food has been finished by the time Minato went outside. Hiroko still has Inari on her head and the crow looks content to nest in her hair for the time being. Minato sits back as the sounds of Naruto and Kyojuro attempting to train echo in his ears. The boys are attempting to train on the trees again, though this time Naruto is also attempting to knock Kyojuro from the branches with his chains. Minato would be worried if not for the fact that Naruto has learned to control his chains very well and Kyojuro has impressive reflexes for a kid his age. "Are you not going to join them, Hiroko?" Jigoro asks as he drinks his tea. He set aside Slayer training for the afternoon but now he isn't so sure they will get around to it with Hattori arriving soon. "No, I think I would rather rest for now. I'm still feeling sore from earlier," she tells him as she settles in and grabs another cup of tea. She holds it in her hands to keep them warm, her eyes gazing out at the boys. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something, Gigi," Hiroko asks, turning her head. Jigoro raises a brow. He hadn't expected anything of the sort. She ponders her words before she meets Jigoro's eyes firmly. "You say that I've improved greatly, right?" And that I can perform the first 4 forms of thunder breathing to your standards? Quote. Jigoro gets a sinking feeling in his gut. He knows a conversation he heard of secondhand that started exactly like this. Sakanji hadn't won that one. I would like to enter final selection this next time, Hiroko says, her eyes firm. There's steel to her, but that does not dissuade the growing pit in Jigoro's gut. He grimaces and sets his cup down. No. I won't allow it until you have mastered all the forms and have killed a demon. You are much too young to even consider sending to final selection, Jigoro says firmly. He doesn't want to think about Hiroko on that mountain, not right now. Maybe in a few years when she has grown much surer in her abilities. Damn it, but she is only 11. He won't send her there. He was angry enough at Sakanji for choosing to send his girl in and Makomo was 12. Final selection? Minato asks. Jigoro glances at him as Hiroko glares at the Thunder Hashira. He tries to ignore the knowledge that she is building an argument against him. It's the test for demon slayers to enter the organization. Trainees have to survive 7 days on a demon-infested mountain and reach the base alive. Only once they have done so do they receive their Nichiren katana, uniform, and Kasugai crow. Most recruits go when they have at least 2 years of experience or more. None younger than 12 have gone in decades until Sakanji decided to let his girl go, Jigoro tells him. He hopes that the knowledge of the danger will push Minato to make Hiroko reconsider her stance. Minato's eyes widen and he looks back to Hiroko. The girl is gripping the fabric of her pants tightly, brows furrowed as she tries to create an argument against Jigoro. He looks back to Jigoro and his lips turn to a grimace. I'm guessing that those that don't make it don't just get sent back to their trainers? Minato demands. Jigoro doesn't answer. It's not something he agrees with. It's not something he likes to think about. Minato looks back to Hiroko as the girl finally decides to speak. If I manage to master the last of the forms, then will you let me? She speaks. Jigoro tenses and he narrows his eyes on her. He's growing frustrated, and the more he thinks about sending her, the more irritable he gets. He doesn't want her to end up dead. Hiroko, this is non-negotiable. I'm not sending you to final selection until you are at least 13 and I am sure of your abilities. Are you forgetting what happened a week ago? You don't just have to think about passing final selection, you also have to worry about the missions you will take after, he says firmly. Hiroko bites back a retort as her cheeks flush with anger. You should listen to him. You don't need to rush yourself, Hiroko, Minato says. His eyes are distant as he grits his teeth. The mention of final selection has curbed his good mood. Hiroko looks at him, eyes wide. She almost looks hurt at his sharp words. I'm thinking this through. I need to be able to protect the others, and after that other demon it goes to reason that I should learn more. She starts. Jigoro slams his hand on the table. His voice rumbles like thunder. Enough. You can't grow stronger if you are dead. Quote. Hiroko's eyes go wide. She flinches back at his raised voice. Outside, the boys have stopped and are looking inside through the open door. Hiroko begins to shake. Her eyes bead with tears and she rises swiftly. It's quick enough that Inari ends up tumbling from her head and has to catch himself before he hits the ground. He lets out a huff and ruffles his feathers as Hiroko darts from the room. Hiroko, Minato calls as he rises to go after her. He doesn't have to take another step because Hiroko is stalled as she runs into something. Or rather, someone. Whoa, watch where you are going. A calm voice intones as Hiroko slams into a figure dressed in the same Demon Slayer uniform as Jigoro. They are also wearing a haori over their shoulders like the Hashira, and they stand as tall as Minato. Mismatched eyes are gazing down at the figure pressed into his side inquisitively. Hiroko looks up and her face flushes dark in embarrassment as she darts away from the newcomer, nearly stumbling off the Engawa. Naruto and Kyojuro spare a glance at the newcomer before they run after Hiroko. Minato grimaces. He wants to go after the girl, but he has a feeling he should remain here. He holds up his hands, forming a shadow clone. The clone salutes him and vanishes in a yellow flash. That should be enough. Well, what has you in such a bad mood, Jigoro? The newcomer says, drawing attention to him again. Minato tenses as he observes the man. He's young, just like Shinjiro warned Minato, but he also holds himself with just as much weight as the other Hashira. He has vibrant blue hair, which is odd enough to make Minato pause. His eyes are also different colors, one a silvery gray and the other a vibrant ice blue. When Jigoro fails to respond, the man turns to Minato and hums. Ah, you must be Minato. I'm Sei Hattori, the Wind Hashira. He inclines his head and walks over to Jigoro. Jigoro huffs and rises to greet the boy as he gathers his anger. He checks him over to make sure he is okay before he looks back to Minato. Minato nods and they find themselves sitting again with Hattori taking Hiroko's spot. Minato trusts his clone to handle the rest of the mess, so he can at least meet with the other Hashira. I take it Jigoro started you on thunder breathing? Hattori cuts right to business, grabbing some tea while Jigoro goes to fetch some food. He can tell that Hattori hasn't had time to rest or eat. Minato watches the man carefully, weighing his skills. Hattori's movements are sure and swift. Even so, Minato knows just from observing him that he is tired. There are stress lines on his young face and his shoulders are tense. Hattori glances at Minato over the rim of his cup of tea. He only looks away to thank Jigoro when the man puts food in front of him. Minato has started to learn thunder breathing. He's shown apt capability with the first two forms after just a week of instruction. Jigoro informs the other Hashira after he manages to calm the current of anger running inside of him. Hattori nods, swallowing a bite of his food as he looks at the object of their attention. So, how do you find the breathing styles compared to your shinobi techniques? He asks. Minato furrows his brow. Hattori is an entirely different person compared to the other Hashira. He can't be much older than 20 and yet he holds the same title. Then again, Shinjiro had told Minato that the former Wind Hashira had recently perished. I find them to be simple but easy enough. The thunder breathing forms are incredibly quick. What little I have gleaned from Kyojiru's training has also shown me the destructive capability of flame breathing. Compared to what I'm used to, it's not as rounded as I would prefer even if the principles were there, Minato says truthfully. Hattori nods and finishes his food, setting his chopsticks down as he leans forward. I figured that might be the case based on what the others told me. Oyakata-sama also gave me some insight. He says that you would like to make your breathing form that's much more suitable for use with your techniques? Quote. Minato nods. He's surprised by the approach even as Hattori taps his fingers on the table. He glances at Jigoro and then whistles. There's a flurry of black as Inari swoops into the room and lands on Hattori's fingers. The crow caws at him and waits as he relays his orders. Send word to Sakanji to expect us within the day. I think it would be best if we moved forward sooner rather than later. Minato tenses and leans closer as he feels unease stir in his gut. I don't feel comfortable leaving my son alone. He begins, about to tack on Kyojuro and possibly Hiroko into that number. Hattori waves his hand as Inari flutters away. Bring them with us. Kyojuro could do well to meet the other slayers his age, and so could Hiroko. Jigoro needs time to work on his Hashira duties too, Hattori says and glances at the other Hashira. Jigoro bristles again but is quick to calm himself as he takes in Hattori's blunt words. It is true, I have been lax while teaching the rest of them, he mutters. Hattori nods sharply. My area is covered for the next week by Masechika and Hasehara. You need to manage your duties before we all end up running behind. It's bad enough that Shinjiro can't get out as much as before. Minato narrows his eyes as Hattori glances at Minato. He begins to explain when he sees Minato ready to defend the man. Hashira have duties. Neither Sakanji nor Jigoro have Sugako as of yet, and they are needed. The faster we can get you up to speed, the better, he informs the man and rises to his feet. Minato rises with him, casting a glance at Jigoro. Jigoro says nothing as Hattori leaves the room. Hattori pauses and glances over his shoulder at the man. You might want to consider Hiroko's offer. If anything, just make the same deal Sakanji made with the master. She would benefit from teaching, Hattori intones, revealing that he had known exactly what had irked Jigoro earlier. He grabs his shoes before leaving an irate Jigoro behind. Boy, don't you dare interfere, she's not your student. Jigoro snaps after the Hashira. Hattori waves his hand dismissively and begins his trek to the back of the house. The same direction as Hiroko and the kids. Minato feels his chest constrict. That was a whirlwind. Even so, he has to get some answers from Jigoro and his clone is still with the kids. He can wait. He turns his attention to the Thunder Hashira as he scowls after his fellow Hashira. Jigoro meets his questioning gaze and snarls. He bites out an answer despite his reluctance. Hattori wants me to let Hiroko go on the stipulation that she can stay and train new thunder-breathing recruits for the first year that she is a demon slayer. It was the deal Sakanji made for Mikomo. In return, he's going to take the missions she would be sent on. Minato's brow furrows and he thinks it over. Provided that the girl survived final selection, which it didn't sound like many did to Minato's horror, the plan was better than sending an 11-year-old out on their own in a demon-infested world. Even for Mikomo, who was 12 if Minato remembered correctly, that deal would ensure she was safe for a year. Why the rush to final selection then? Why rush for a child to just get killed at the hands of demons? It's because if they wait till their normal age, Mikomo will be 15. She worries that by then the strain of Sakanji training her and others would cause a decline in his status as Hashira. Hattori mentioned our duties and one of those is patrolling a specific area laid out by the master. Shinjiro's area is already suffering because he has to care for his wife on top of training his son, Jigoro informs Minato. It makes Minato realize that he spoke aloud. Minato grimaces. That would explain the demons that had managed to get through and attack the kids and the demons he had first run into. Jigoro had to be struggling to teach Hiroko properly on top of managing his duties. Typically, a Hashira retires and then trains recruits, but right now we have no one with the skill required to take our positions. That made even more sense. It still wasn't a good setup in the long run because if the system lacked Hashira-level members then the Corps would be faced with moments like this. Minato couldn't help but compare it to the Anbu and Jonin forces. Typically, Jonin took up Genin 3 at a time, but that removed them from missions that required their skill while they were teaching. Anbu filled in these spots as did groups of Chunin. How do the ranks of demon slayers work? Minato asks. Jigoro seems surprised by the change in topic but relays the information to him. The ranks start at Mizunoto, the lowest, and go up to Mizuno, Kanoto, Kanu, Tsuchinoto, Tsuchino, Hinoto, Hino, Kinoto, and finally Kino. Sugako are technically above Kino and following them are the Hashira. Minato raises a brow. The 10 heavenly stems? It reminded him of those under Danzo's control. Interesting enough. What would you say the majority of slayers are ranked? He asks next. Jigoro seems to realize what he's getting at as he answers him. The last time we looked it was mostly Tsuchinoto. We only have a few dozen slayers ranked Kino and a wealth of slayers ranked Kanu. Minato takes that information and grimaces. The outlook isn't that good. Hashira are on par with the Cage in just base skill from what Minato has gathered. Those underneath them must be around Jonin rank. That meant Tsuchinoto were probably Chunin level and Mizunoto might be a bit higher than Genin. How many kids tend to enter the final selection and how many pass? Minato asks even though he doesn't want to. 50 recruits typically enter. Less than 20% pass. The last exam saw only 10 students surviving. Jigoro informs him solemnly. Minato's blood runs cold. That was just. He looks up at Jigoro as he runs through the calculations. 50 kids entering and yet only 10 leave alive? Something was wrong with their system. Why the hell were they just sending kids to die? It was one thing to make sure they were ready to go, it was another to basically send them to die. 10 out of 50 were incredibly small. Jigoro mentioned that 2 exams were held a year. That pass rate was more like the Chunin exams than the Genin exams. Typically, there were anywhere from 4 to 5 teams of 3 that graduated out of a total of 15. The number of kids that survived the first year as Genin was close to 80%. With numbers like that, it was little wonder to Minato that the Demon Slayers were struggling. They would possibly get 20 members a year. If those kids survived to make it up the ranks, probably with a 40% mortality rate at what Minato had gathered. He didn't like where his thoughts were going. There was a good chance that the Demon Slayer Corps would die out at the rate they were going. That was just insane. Something needs to change. That system isn't working, and it's just going to choke your forces. Have you ever thought of another way to test recruits? Minato demands. It reminds him far too much of Kiri's graduation exam. Jigoro narrows his eyes on Minato. The Corps can't divide its resources to slayers that aren't ready to face demons. Final selection may seem cruel but wasting resources would lead to our downfall. Minato sighs and waves his hand, running the same hand through his hair. I'm not saying you just pass them without a test. There has to be a better way. Maybe having older slayers look out for those that are going to fail and step in? You could send those back to be taught by the other trainers, provided you have them. Back in my village, we would pair younger shinobi into teams of 3 under a more experienced shinobi. If the kids didn't pass their final exam, they were either sent back to the academy to learn for another year or they were removed from the program and given other options. Jigoro pauses and looks at him, really looks at him. Minato is pondering the options and trying to come up with the best way to handle this. You would have to talk to the master, but that would be a good idea, Jigoro murmurs and looks down. The Demon Slayer Corps had operated under the same structure for hundreds of years, ever since its founding probably. Then again, the recruitment and training for Slayers back then were much stricter than it was now. The Corps was facing hard times and most Hashira barely lasted a year or 2 into their terms. Hattori's brother and the former Wind Hashira had barely been Hashira for 3 years when he perished, and now Hattori was faced with a position he didn't feel he was ready for. That would be a good discussion to have. A calm tone relays and both Hashira look up to see Hattori has returned. He remains outside, eyes observing them both. At his side is a familiar blonde female. Behind him, Minato's clone salutes and vanishes in a puff of smoke. Memories funnel in as Minato siphons through them. It seems like Hattori had placated Hiroko with the idea that she might be able to convince Jigoro to do the same thing Sakanji was doing for Mikomo. Not what Minato wanted, but it would at least keep the girl at bay for the moment. The boys had gone to pack after Hattori informed them of their impromptu trip. Hiroko, shouldn't you be packing with the boys if you are coming with us? Minato asks. Hattori's eyes flicker with surprise and Hiroko's eyes brighten as she nods. She avoids looking at Jigoro as she rushes away. Your clones share memories with you? Hattori asks as he observes. Minato nods and explains. Sort of. Once they pop, I collect their memories and can sort through them. It can be a hassle when I recall more than a few clones at once. Hattori nods, humming softly. That would be incredibly useful for training. I take it that's one of the reasons you are grasping the forms so quickly? He asks. Minato pauses, blinking at him. He then rubs the back of his neck sheepishly. Actually, I honestly forgot about it. I've just been learning things the old-fashioned way, Minato says as he realizes that he had missed out on utilizing a valuable tool. Hattori gives him a look, one that speaks of annoyance and shock. He can't seem to understand how Minato would forget something like that. To be fair, shadow clones require an incredible amount of chakra, so Minato has never thought to use them for training, considering that just having 1 or 2 isn't the best. One would need hundreds to truly make a difference in the way Hattori was suggesting. Before the Kyuubi, Minato hadn't had the luxury of spawning out a massive number of clones the way he theoretically can now. He hadn't thought of using clones like that. He would have to test it out. Well, you somehow managed to impress me and make me wonder how you are that smart when you are so stupid, Hattori says and sighs. Minato winces. That sounds frighteningly close to something that Kushina would have said. He can't really take offense when it's the truth this time. If you really want to bring up the matter to the master, then that can be our first stop. I believe you can get us there faster than walking? Hattori asks. At Minato's nod, Hattori relaxes. Good. I want to get you started on wind breathing as fast as possible. I don't want to leave the boys alone too long, he says and runs a hand through his mass of blue hair. Jigoro huffs from behind Minato. I'm sure they will be fine, they are both Tsuchino, he starts, but is cut off as Hattori levels him with a dark glare. My brother was a Hashira. He died not even a few months ago to a suspected upper moon. The demons that we face, aren't of a level that normal core members can handle. Jigoro. Do well to remember that. Hattori bites back at him. Ah, Minato can see it now. The real reason Hattori was so short with them and just came in like a whirlwind. He was worried for those he left to defend his area while he was trying to get Minato up to speed. It was enlightening to realize. Minato had thought the boy just had that type of personality, but now he can see that in truth, Hattori must be incredibly kind. His shoulders are held firm, but there is still that air of exhaustion around him. Minato again wondered how old he was and just how ragged he had been run after his brother's death. Jigoro's mouth snaps shut. He says nothing else and looks away as he inclines his head regretfully. Hattori turns away, gazing out at the expanse of woods so he can avoid looking at them. He looks frustrated with himself that he lost his cool like that. Minato can relate. He can also relate to heavy responsibilities weighing on someone so young. Jigoro, can you go help the boys pack? Minato asks softly. Jigoro opens his mouth to argue, but at Minato's meaningful look he decides better of it and nods sharply. He turns and stalks from the table to help the boys. Minato steps onto the Ingawa, sliding the shogi door shut behind him as he gestures to Hattori. Hattori spares him a questioning brow but sighs when Minato sits down on the porch. He follows, laying his blade carefully next to him. He removes his haori from his shoulders and lays it next to his blade. It's a pretty fabric with blue hydrangea flowers akin to Hattori's hair embroidered carefully on gray fabric. It's more feminine than Shinjuru's choice of flames on his haori or Jigoro's yellow triangle pattern, but it suits the boy. Taking a note from Hattori's book, Minato asks, "So, how old are you?" He figured that the boy would appreciate getting to the point more than stalling with pleasantries. Hattori sighs but answers him calmly. 18. You? Quote. Minato hums. 29. I turned 30 on the 25th day of the year. Hattori eyes him carefully at that. He takes in Minato's build and physique. Minato knows that he looks incredibly young for his age. It was equal parts Kurama's influence and the care he had taken for his health. Tsunade had drilled into his head how to maintain his charka so that she wouldn't have to take the hat before his death. She was afraid of it enough that she threatened to throw the Uzumaki life seal on him. You don't want to be a Hashira, do you? Minato asks. Hattori grimaces and looks away. He almost doesn't answer before he finally just lets the weight rush from his shoulders. If Minato was willing to listen, then he might as well speak. I was content training the newer recruits. My brother, he was meant for this. He was selfless and he trained for years to get the position. I was the default when he was killed. If anyone else had been able to, I would have let them take it in a heartbeat. Minato nodded. Hattori reminded him of Jiraiya in a way. Jiraiya was a bit more excitable than the bitter boy next to him, but that meant little in comparison. They both had the skill to be great, but they saw others as more fit for the role. Jiraiya never wanted to be Hokage, and probably would have fled in the event that he had to take the hat. The Toad Sennin saw Tsunade as much more suited for the position after all. Hattori was only slightly different because he had taken his brother's position, but he was obviously not handling the stress well. If I can get up to that level, would it help? Having another Hashira around, I mean? Minato asks. Hattori levels him with a firm gaze, assessing him and reading into his words. He's taking Minato seriously, which is appreciated. After a bout of silence, Hattori nods and looks away again. That would help. Why do you think I'm insistent that you learn as fast as possible? I don't like the idea of sending someone unprepared out into a world like that to hunt demons, but the horrible part is that it is needed. It's the same way with Hiroko and Mikomo. If Hiroko has the skills to kill demons, then we shouldn't stop her. If Mikomo can fight on her own, why are we holding her back? We need talented slayers. Hattori sighs and runs his hand through his hair again. If we can get them up to speed and have them start training more slayers while the Hashira handle matters outside, then we should. Mikomo mastered all the forms of water breathing in only 2 years. Hiroko has 4 forms under her belt, but it's only been a few months. With you pushing her along in other areas that round her out, because for all the utilization of breath styles they're very stagnant, she'll have a good basis to start training others. Yes, she's only 11, but she's skilled enough to do that at least. Minato can see where he is coming from. Hiroko and the other girl, Mikomo, could benefit greatly from this plan. Maybe Minato could get the master on board with some of his ideas on the final selection while figuring out a safe way to get the girls prepared. The Hashira need some sort of reprieve that will allow them to go back to their duties. Minato might as well include Kyojuro in with the girls because the boy is unlikely to stay behind for long. How soon is the final selection? Minato asks. Hattori hums. New Year's. Well, that gives them 4 months to speedrun learning forms and shinobi combat. Minato has worked on tighter timetables in war. He just hopes this won't be as disastrous or deadly. Drabble and answer. A rush of chakra, a pulse as the figure cradles the large scroll against their small form. Excitement, terror, and hope kindle in their chest. It had been small, so small that they almost missed it. The scroll glowed. It showed them something they had been terrified to witness, only to alleviate all of that. Then again, it brought about more questions than answers. With another pull of chakra and the figure lands outside of another pool. They are already making quick work as they travel across trees into the cluttered sounds of rebuilding. The village isn't quite alive the way it used to be, but it's getting there. A flicker of chakra as the figure bounds up the side of a large red building. They aim for the window and sail inside when they find it open. Inside, all talk stalls. The woman at the desk turns sharply to him, and another tall figure with white hair shifts immediately to face the newcomer. Fukasaku looks up to meet both Jiraiya's and Tsunade's eyes as he unrolls the scroll. They are already asking him what is going on, but he knows it's far better to show than tell. Jiraiya is the first to notice. Where the name had faded out before, a sign of death among summoners, the name most recently signed on the toad summoning scroll pulsed with chakra. Minato-kun is alive. Chapter 15. Elemental Bonds, Cherished Friends. Sakanji was many things. He was the water Hashira, a teacher of many students, and the current guardian of 3 kids. He was not easily surprised. Even so, faced with Inari reciting that Minato and Co. would be coming to his home ahead of schedule, he couldn't help the stirring of surprise in his gut. He was seated in the village, away from his home after taking care of a demon matter. Mikomo was situated enough to teach the wayward boys whom he had taken in a month prior. Inari rested on his lap, happily eating the seed spread that Sakanji laid out as he read over the letter Hattori had his bird deliver. The letter had an odd symbol on it that Urokodaki was informed to up near his home in a place where the company wouldn't be intrusive. It was a unique symbol of scrawling kanji. The writing was rather messy, but Sakanji recognized it enough as a reference to love, family, endurance, and possibly shinobi. Then again, he had trouble with the scrawling lines. From what he gathered in Hattori's letter, it was Minato's marker. Minato would be able to teleport to the marker at any point, allowing quick travel between Jigoro, Shinjiro, and Sakonji's estates. Sakonji would bet his life on Minato placing one of his markers at the master's mansion as well. It would worry him if it didn't settle some of his worries about the safety of the master. From what he had gathered in his letters with the man, he trusted Minato deeply. Sakonji rose to his feet and tucked the piece of paper into his pants. Inari let out a small sound and cawed as he rose and flew off. Sakonji hummed and made his way back to his home. He wasn't rushing despite the knowledge of the marker in his pocket. It was barely reaching dinner time, and if Minato hadn't appeared yet, then he must have been busy. Taking the path one step at a time, Sakonji admired the scenery as he approached his mountain home. He stopped at the shrine to pay his respects before making his way through the winding paths to his home at the top of the mountain. When he had reached the fork in the path that would take him directly home, he found he wasn't alone. Mikomo stood waiting for him with a calm smile on her face. She bowed her head as she greeted him. "Welcome home, Urokodaki-sensei." He inclined his head and stopped next to her. She turned around and they began to make their way back. They could hear the telltale signs that Giyu and Sabito were fighting again. "Have they made progress?" Sakonji asks, taking a sharp breath. Anger, annoyance, fear, sadness, and determination. The smells were heavy around the two boys as Sabito berated Giyu for something or the other, causing the boy to cry. Mikomo hummed, knowledge beyond her 12 years in her gentle blue eyes. Giyu is still struggling with the traps on the mountain, and Sabito has started to grasp the first form. They both failed to make it down the mountain faster than last time. Sakonji nods, taking the form of both boys as he arrived. Giyu is sniveling and practically hidden under the massive haori of his sister, grimacing at Sabito as the boy shouts at him. For an 8-year-old, Sabito has a rather impressive shout. "You could have dodged that trap if you weren't too busy cowering." Sabito snarls, eyes dark as he towers over the boy. He's over a year older than Giyu, but even then, he shouldn't be that much larger than the kid. Sakonji had been working to strengthen Giyu and would have had better luck if he had found Giyu earlier. He had only found Giyu when he did because of Mikomo. Without her insight, he might have missed the boy till much later when Giyu had accidentally stumbled on them while they were on a mission. Giyu hugs the haori tighter around his shoulders. "I just got scared," he murmurs. Before Sabito can go into another rant, Mikomo arrives. She steps between the arguing boys with practiced ease and grace that betrays her small countenance. "Sabito, you should be kinder to Giyu." "Giyu, it's okay if you get scared, that's why we are practicing for. Just remember that you can dodge the trap next time, okay?" She intones calmly. Sabito withholds a growl. He knows better than to fight with the girl after he made that mistake the first time. She was terrifying in her own right, despite being smaller than him. Mikomo smiles at them both and Giyu nods as he rubs his tears away. Sakanji clears his throat and both boys turn sharply to him. Sabito immediately bows while Giyu meekly inclines his head. "Welcome back, Urokodaki-sensei," the boy says softly. Sakanji hums and nods to him before gesturing for the three children to follow him. They fall in line, both boys behind him and Mikomo at his side. He leads them back home where Mikomo enters first and heads to the kitchen to make tea. "Wash up. We will have guests soon," Sakanji informs the kids. The boys nod and Sabito grabs Giyu's hand to drag him with him. Mikomo is quietly humming in the kitchen as she prepares tea. Before he sits at the table, Sakanji sets the seal in his pocket in the empty sitting area, ensuring there is enough room should Minato drop in with the kids. Hattori had mentioned Minato would bring his son, but Sakanji was prepared for more. Shinjiro had written to him about how Kyojuro was practically attached to Naruto's side after only a week with the boy. The two boys had also adopted Jigoro's apprentice into their fold, leading Sakanji to believe that his home was about to get much more lively. "Should I prepare the guest room?" Mikomo asks as she sets the tea set down next to him. She makes sure to put the pot on a cast metal protector so it doesn't damage the table. Sakanji spares her a glance. She's incredibly perceptive at times. "I believe that would be for the best. You may end up with Hiroko in your room, based on what I know." Hattori and Minato will share the guest room and the boys can room together. Mikomo's eyes brighten at the idea of sharing her room. She hardly met another girl her age since they started her training and she had heard a good amount about Hiroko from the letters Sakanji exchanged with Jigoro. With another nod in Sakonji's direction, the small girl rose to go set up the rooms. Sabito and Giyu arrived shortly after she left and sat at the table to enjoy tea before Sakanji delegated tasks for their dinner. He wanted to wait to ensure the proper head count. There was a heavy hum, the seal in the living room pulsing before smoke rose. Sakanji turned his head and the boys both swiveled in shock. "That is very handy," Hattori's voice sounds from the smoke. The Hashira stands next to another figure of similar height, a young girl grasped in front of him. Two smaller figures are situated next to Minato's side as the blonde comes into view with the fading smoke. Sakanji was right about Minato bringing all the kids. It was a good thing that the water Hashira had prepared for it. "It can be. I'm surprised you didn't react more to it." Shinjiro fell over the first time, Minato says with an air of amusement. Hattori hums and lets go of Hiroko's shoulders as he takes a step around her. She squeaks and moves next to Minato and Kyojuro as he steps firmly into the room. "Well, the first time I felt queasy but it mostly reminds me of the wind-breathing forms. At least I know that you can handle disorientation." Shinjiro is far too grounded for such a thing. Hattori speaks knowingly. He turns to face Sakanji next and inclines his head respectfully. "Sorry for dropping in, Sakanji. Thank you for having us," he says, his mismatched eyes fluttering closed as he bows his head. Sakanji hums and rises from his seat. "It is good to see you again, Hattori. How have the months treated you?" Sakanji asks as he settles next to the boy. Hattori offers him a small but tired smile. "As well as they can be. Events are looking better now, but we still have a long way to go before we settle in, he says truthfully, glancing at Minato as he mentions things are getting better. Sakanji follows his line of thought to find Minato holding Naruto in his arms while the boy chats his head off. The older blonde nods to Sakanji but can't quite tear away from whatever conversation Naruto has him in. Hiroko and Kyojuro both walk over, bowing their heads together as they thank him for hosting them. Kyojuro is a touch louder than the girl and keeps glancing at Sabito and Giyu while Hiroko is a picture of calm and delicate. Exactly as Jigoro described. Urokodaki-sensei, who are they? Sabito speaks up from behind him and Sakanji notes that he and Giyu have crept closer. Minato tilts his head and sets his son down as they both are made aware of the two boys. Giyu looks especially shy as he observes the other kids, while Sabito holds his arm to keep the boy in place. Hiroko glances at Hattori since he is the closest adult, and when the man nods, she turns a soft smile at the boys. I'm Hiroko and a student of the Thunder Hashira. It's nice to meet you. Kyojuro goes next as he smiles brightly at the two boys. His hair only seems to get larger, which is an odd trait that Sakanji recognizes from his father. I'm Rengoku Kyojuro and my father is the Flame Hashira. Quote. His volume is also quite a bit louder than expected, but Urokodaki is used to Sabito at this point and doesn't question it. Naruto goes next as he scrambles from his father into the personal space of the boys. Minato attempts to stop Naruto but doesn't quite manage it in time as Naruto practically bounces in front of both boys like a ball of sunshine. I'm Naruto, and I don't have a teacher other than Tusan, but I can use chakra chains and walk on trees, he says cheerfully. Giyu gazes at him with a lost expression, his dark blue eyes shining with poorly concealed awe and trepidation. Sabito on the other hand just blinks at the little boy before huffing. He lets go of Giyu and crosses his arms over his chest. I'm Sabito and this is Giyu. We are both students of Urokodaki-sensei. Giyu flushes at Sabito introducing him, making a small sound as he frowns. Sakanji gently reaches out to touch his shoulder and Giyu blinks at him in confusion. The Hashira gestures to Naruto and the others and Giyu flushes red. That seems to give him enough courage and he steps closer to Naruto. I'm Giyu, it's nice to meet you Naruto-kun, he says quietly. He then looks at the others and flashes them a small smile. You too as well, Hiroko-san, Kyojuro-san. Kyojuro jumps next to Naruto and Hiroko giggles as the boy takes Giyu's hand into his own while Naruto snatches his arm. Sakanji has a feeling that this has happened before based on Hiroko and Minato's fond expressions. You have really nice eyes Giyu. Blue is the best, huh? Naruto cheers and Giyu can only nod in shock. Sabito glares at the blondes, stepping closer with violence in mind because despite his continual need to belittle Giyu he is easily made jealous. He doesn't get far before a small hand grabs his shoulder. Those are lovely names, Mikomo says as she pushes past the boy. Sabito flushes at how easily she shoves him to the side as she makes a beeline for Hiroko. Hiroko catches her gaze and there's something different that sparks in her eyes as Mikomo comes next to her. Hiroko-chan, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Mikomo. Mikomo introduces, smiling gently as she holds her hands behind her back and sways. Hiroko nods, her features softening on the girl. Sakanji notes the interaction as Naruto and Kyojuro go to the girl and Mikomo finds herself surrounded by blondes. She doesn't seem to mind and talks softly as she addresses them calmly. Minato hums and Sakanji glances to see that he has taken residence next to Hattori. Hattori is leaning back against the wall, his tired countenance carefully hidden from all but the adults. "I'm glad they're getting along," Minato murmurs, watching as Mikomo leads Hattori away from the mess of boys to sit at the table. The girls are both incredibly gentle and calm as they speak. Hiroko once again melds with the newcomer, but unlike before, Minato can see that Hiroko isn't just reacting and mirroring the girl. She's actively being herself. Naruto is now arguing with Sabito as they fight over Gyu's hand while Kyojuro just laughs proudly and keeps his hold on Gyu's other hand. Well, everyone but Sabito. He and Naruto might end up tumbling at some point. Hattori says knowingly and pushes away from the wall with a hum. He casts a mischievous look at Sakanji. Already the water Hashira feels on edge. He is quite familiar with Hattori's habits, and back before he took on the mantle of Hashira he was known for his quick wit and tendency to stir the pot among slayers. I think Mikomo-chan has taken Hiroko-chan for herself. Minato and Sakanji look over to find that Hattori is right. Mikomo subtly smiles with her same deadly grace if Sabito or Gyu even tries to approach while Hiroko tells her about something or the other. From the looks of it, they're talking about flexibility. Indeed. "Oh, before I forget," Minato murmurs, and both Hashira turn to him as he pulls out 2 scrolls. He hands one to Hattori, who takes it with a raised brow, while he holds up the other. "Oyakata-sama offered some food. I brought it over, but I don't want to make a mess, so where should I put it?" Minato asks. Hattori is still looking at both scrolls with curiosity. Sakanji gestures to the table with the girls. "The boys have washed up. I'm sure they are hungry after training," he comments. Minato nods and grins before heading to the table. Attention shifts to him as he calmly asks the girls to shift the tea to the side. After they have, he lays out the scroll and pulses his chakra. The table fills with food quickly. Multiple dishes, wrapped carefully, appear on the surface of the scroll. Hiroko's eyes spark with light as all attention is drawn to the feast that suddenly spawned into being. "That is incredibly useful," Hattori says at the same time that Sakanji speaks. "Interesting." Minato nods and begins to unwrap the dishes. The adults join as Minato hands the scroll to Hirokodaki. "These are storage scrolls. You can contain multiple items inside one scroll, though I often designate them with different types of items so I don't run into problems when unsealing them." Hattori has a small amount of chakra, and after looking, "You do as well, Sakanji," Minato says as Sakanji takes the scroll. "So in theory we can use this strange energy you use?" Hattori asks as he moves to take a seat. Sakanji and Minato follow. "Yes, in theory. I'll have to show you how to access it, but you have the same reserves as civilians, which should allow for the general use of scrolls and some seals. Maybe not explosive tags, but these should be fine. I find them useful when you are on the road," Minato tells them. Naruto rushes over with a laugh. He sprawls on Minato's leg and Minato reaches out to ruffle his hair as he cheers at the adults. Hiroko ne and Kyojuro ni have chakra too. He giggles when Minato boops his nose. Sakanji looks at the mentioned kids, finding that they have joined the group. Sabito managed to sit on the other side of Hiroko while he pulled Gyu next to him. Naruto keeps to Minato's lap, leaving Kyojuro to take a seat next to Giyu as the table becomes crowded with everyone. Hiroko smiles at Naruto and looks over at Kyojuro. They can sense the questioning air, so they decide to perform one of the techniques Minato showed them. Hiroko rises to her feet with Kyojuro and they both bow to Sakanji to excuse their actions, before they both begin to walk up on the bare walls. Sabito looks like he is about to lose it. Giyu's eyes are wide in shock and even Sakanji stalls as his brain fizzles. Mikomo's eyes are sparkling as she watches Hiroko and Kyojuro go vertical, then upside down. The kids look at Minato and he nods at them, proud. Hattori looks disgruntled as he observes both kids. They drop suddenly, having just enough space to flip and land on their feet. Sakanji clears his throat, the sound betraying his shock behind his mask. They can walk on walls? He asks Minato. He is recalling the fight with Jigoro and how Minato had appeared on the wall, stuck to the surface like it was the floor. It seems that those with chakra could do impossible things. Water too, but we are still working on that with it being winter and everything. Jigoro's orchard only has a small river and it's frozen over now, Minato says and hums. Hiroko settles back next to Mikomo. There's a light in Mikomo's eyes as she looks between her new friend and Minato. Sakanji nods and settles back, grabbing some tea to settle the ache in his chest. He had a feeling the rest of the week would be just as, if not more eventful. Would Hattori and I be able to learn something like that? He asks instead of asking what he wants to know. Minato pauses and then tilts his head to either side. I'm not sure. It's possible you can grow your reserves, but again you have even less than the kids do. Sakanji nods. Interesting. How did you find out that Hiroko and Kyojuro could do this? He asks Minato. That earns him a sheepish gaze. I noticed Hiroko was using chakra when she tried to use breathing techniques which created lightning. I tested her affinity for it by seeing how she would react to my own chakra. I did the same for Kyojuro just to see, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out they have a decent amount of chakra. I can also sense it, though it takes me actively searching as I did with Yuhashira. Minato informs him calmly. Sakanji nods. Would you be able to test the boys and Mikomo then? Quote. Minato blinks, but he closes his eyes. Even Naruto stills, gazing up at his father with bright eyes. Minato hums and his lips twitch. Sabito and Giyu have a good amount of chakra, possibly the same as Hiroko. Mikomo doesn't have much, but she does have enough to be able to use seals like you and Hattori, Minato confirms. Sakanji takes a deep breath. He filters out the smells of the food, used to narrowing down other smells after years of using his ability. He hardly stops total concentration breathing even in his sleep these days, but more effort in the technique heightens his senses. He tries to smell for any difference. Minato smells of leaves and oddly salt, like the sea. Naruto smells of the sun and a touch of salt. Kyojuro is much like his father, burning embers and smoke. Hiroko is discernibly by her wisteria, though under that is something like rain. Mikomo is floral, Giyu as well. Sabito smells like old moss, and Hattori like steel. He focuses just a bit more on Minato and Naruto, trying to find any similarities. To his surprise, there are a few. Underneath their base scents is a heavy and rich scent of something primal. For Naruto, the scent is sweeter, but for Minato, it's almost akin to the putrid scent of a demon. The only difference is the lack of blood. There isn't anything else, and he already knows he can't find a similarity in the smells between Minato and the other kids. It would seem that this chakra Minato spoke of wasn't discernible to him. There was an inkling in his head over the bit of Minato's scent that reminded him of a demon. He chose to let it slide for the time being because Minato had the trust of Jigoro, Shinjiro, and the master. He also had Shinjiro's respect, which was hard to get. "Would you be willing to teach my students what you are teaching Hiroko and Kyojuro?" Sakanji asks. Minato meets his gaze and he nods. "I can manage that. I would prefer it, considering it can only help in the long run," he says truthfully. With that, Sakanji tells the children they can eat and the food is quickly divided among them. He subtly places more food on Hattori's plate as the Wind Hashira fails to add an adequate amount, wanting to leave more for the kids. A sigh is sent his way but nothing is said. Minato fills Naruto's plate and then his own, focusing mostly on meats and vegetables for his son while he takes whatever isn't being consumed. Mikomo set up the guest bedroom for you and Hattori, Minato. Kyojuro and Naruto can rest with Sabito and Giyu, and Hiroko can stay with Mikomo. Sakanji informs the adults. Hattori and Minato thank him, though Minato makes sure that Naruto is okay with the arrangement before he agrees. Hiroko smiles at Mikomo, her eyes betraying her excitement at the idea of sharing a room with the older girl. They keep their heads bent together, likely sharing ideas and interests as Hiroko giggles and Mikomo smiles. Kyojuro laughs happily and Giyu spares him a gentle smile. Sabito huffs, but even he can't hide his smile. "I believe it would be best to get a full night's sleep and design an appropriate training schedule for everyone in the morning," Sakanji informs Minato and gets a nod in return. Not long after the food has been devoured, Hattori calls it a night. He heads to the quest room, knowing where it is because of previous visits. Minato stays as Naruto falls asleep against him. The house is lively, livelier than Sakanji has ever seen it. He can't bring himself to mind the noise even if it's unfamiliar. Children's laughter relaxes his shoulders and the gentle way that they integrate sets him at ease. Minato notices his reaction and casts him a thankful smile before he asks Giyu to show him where he can set Naruto to sleep. Kyojuro and Sabito are finished, following the three to get ready for bed. Mikomo wishes Sakanji a pleasant sleep and grabs Hiroko's hand. The girl has no choice but to follow her new friend. Hiroko doesn't seem to mind much, following without question. Minato returns as Sakanji is putting things away. He aids him as the house descends into quiet again. There are faint murmurs as the boys settle in. The girls are calm and quiet compared to them, lending to the idea that they won't cause trouble. "Thank you, I didn't want to intrude, but I found that I can hardly let the three kids out of my sight after what happened," Minato tells him when they have finished putting things away. Sakanji turns to him, mask remaining on his face. Minato isn't focused on him, but rather on his hands. "I do not mind the lively atmosphere. I believe it would benefit both boys to get to know others." Sabito is brash but caring, and Giyu needs a gentle guide in the right direction. Mikomo, Sakanji trails off and Minato huffs a laugh. She's not going to let go of Hiroko. "I think Jigoro is going to have trouble getting her back," Minato murmurs in agreement. His eyes darken at the reminder of Jigoro and Hiroko. He was glad to remove Hiroko from the man after their fight. Jigoro is brash and firm in his resolve. He would never apologize and would hold to his beliefs. The fact that those beliefs aligned with Hiroko handling everything on her own weren't something Minato agreed with either. Hattori mentioned Hiroko wishes to join final selection. Are you going to attempt to dissuade her? Sakanji voices. Minato winces. He doesn't want to think about it, that much is obvious. He raises a hand to run through his hair. It's more emotion than he had shown Sakanji the last time they met, lending to the idea that Minato was slowly growing more comfortable with the Hashira. He dropped his hand quickly as he righted himself. It's up to her. I will train her, and I'm sure you will have some useful tips for her as she strives to master as much as she can, Minato tells him. Sakanji nods. He steps past Minato to head to his room but stalls just as he walks past Minato. And your son? He asks. Minato tenses behind him. The air grows sharp and Minato lets out a bitter sound. He can learn to protect himself. I'm not willing to teach more than that. Sakanji nods. At least you aren't a fool. He can join Giyu and Sabito if you change your mind. The two split and Sakanji does not spare Minato another glance as he enters his room. Rather than getting ready for bed and settling in for the night, Sakanji prepares himself to lie down only to take a seat at his desk. He begins to write, already planning for the days to come. Drabble lost. He doesn't know where he is. The voice in his head is strangely quiet in the haze of snow. He feels cold even as he huddles in the small cave. One moment he was with his brother and sister, their fearful gazes twisting into something else. The next he was here in this cold and snowy land. He shivers and tightens his grip around himself. He doesn't like it here. He wants to go home. But, well, he isn't sure he has a home anymore. Not after what he did. Tears burst through, spilling over his cheeks even as he rubs desperately at his eyes. He doesn't want to cry, it never helps, but he can't stop it. Hey, what's wrong? A voice, warm and soft, calls through to him. He tenses, scared. He moves further back and tugs at the ground to try to get it to listen to him, to protect. Kind eyes peer at him from outside, a lantern lifted to cut through the haze of the stormy cold night. The eyes are a brilliant red but they show nothing but softness as the man gazes at him. There you are. Are you hurt? The kind man asks. He isn't sure how he should react. He's never been asked those questions. He nods instead, hiding deeper in his clothes. Ah, you look cold. Would you come out? I live close by, I can get you warmed up. The stranger asks, his voice never strained from its gentle murmur. He isn't sure if he wants to. No, he isn't sure if he should. People don't help him. People run from him, are afraid of him. The only person who is nice to him is his uncle. But the man looks nice. His voice is soft and there is just something calm about him. He takes the offered hand, allows the stranger to pull him in close, and revels in the sudden spark of warmth around him. He closes his eyes, savoring every moment as the man leans down to him. When he opens his eyes there is dark red in his vision, darker than the hair on his own head. The kind red eyes don't change or shift like a cruel joke. Come on, let's get you warmed up. Chapter 16. Twisting thoughts, learning forms. There's an edge to the air. It's early morning and Minato has woken up to start training. The house is oddly quiet compared to the night before. Hattori has already woken and left the room, his bedding folded and tucked neatly away. Minato gets ready and steps outside the room. He pulses his chakra and finds the kids sleeping soundly. Naruto is nestled between Giyu and Kyojuro, while Sabito is curled on Giyu's other side. Hiroko and Mikomo fell asleep clutching one another's hands. A gentle smile passes his features. Minato almost can't help himself as he moves over to the other room, carefully opening the shogi door open a crack. Hiroko and Mikomo lay as he sensed, next to one another. Their hands are intertwined even in sleep and their covers are wound around them messily. He carefully slips inside and grabs a spare blanket to cover them both in, humming gently. He closes the door behind him and enters the room with the boys next. He has to stifle a laugh when he sees Naruto isn't just between Giyu and Kyojuro, but rather over top of them. He's splayed out completely like he normally would be on top of Minato, and it makes something fond pang in his chest. Minato places the blankets over the boys as well, shifting and moving outside as silently as a ghost. He finds his way to the outside and takes a deep breath in the frigid air. There are clouds overhead and the air speaks of possible snow as a cold wind blows through the courtyard. Ahead of Minato, another figure has gathered the same idea and is currently practicing. Minato pauses to observe Hattori. He had not been able to observe the man fighting, but now, he can see why Hattori had a much easier time with the Flying Thunder God technique compared to Shinjiro. Hattori is running through forms quickly, his blade glinting in the early morning haze. It's fairly dark with the cloud cover, but lanterns are lit along the pathway. Hattori's eyes are focused on another enemy, unseen to all but him. His movements are swift, his footwork matching Jigoro's speed while his blade is much faster. He rotates, creating a large cyclone of wind that forms a sort of tunnel as he passes. He shifts on his feet, making 4 slashes that resemble claws as he strikes down. Hattori pivots on his feet, swirling as a whirlwind of slashes extends from his body. Minato can easily see the dual purpose of the technique. It would serve to fend off an attack while also pushing the enemy back. Hattori drops low, showcasing quite a bit of flexibility as he twists his grip and pushes his blade up in a series of continual slashes. The Wind Hashira's movements never cease. He's a whirlwind of movement, a force to be reckoned with. Minato can easily see Kushina in how he moves and the ferocity that he fights with. There are also elements of the Inuzuka, and as Minato draws parallels, Hattori shifts on his feet again. It's as he twirls in place and creates a circular cutting path of wind that Minato realizes something. Hattori's breathing is different. He had hardly noted such a thing with the other Hashira because of how their fights played out, but now, after learning of their breathing technique, he can see it. The Hashira's breaths are measured and sure. He uses each breath to fuel his movements completely and allows himself to whip around dangerously. He jumps, leaps into the next form as he curves his strike upward. He follows this leap by another, creating a circular torrent that compounds his previous rush of wind. Minato can hear the crack in the air as the burst goes through. Obviously, this ability is one of the strongest ones for Hattori. Minato can see that Hattori took the idea of not being grounded to heart. His moves are so much more deadly when he's airborne. Hattori drops, arching his back as he pushes up with one hand. Instantly Minato tenses because he can see Hattori wince on his wrist. Hattori still attempts the move, but he isn't far enough in the air as he releases a gust of clashes below him, the spinning whirlwind catching parts of his arms and face. He twists and lands in a crouch. His eyes are on the micro-cuts in his skin as he mutters. Minato can see his wrist is wrapped and obviously not fully healed. He walks over and Hattori's head tilts in his direction, his eyes tracking Minato's movements as the shinobi crouches and lays a glowing green hand on Hattori's cuts. Hattori watches the cuts vanish under Minato's scrutiny. His brow is furrowed in concentration as he trails it to Hattori's wrist. Minato is hardly on par with Tsunade's healing, or even Orochimaru's. He still knows a good amount because of Tsunade's insistence. He can tell that Hattori's bones are still healing from an improper mend several weeks ago. Hattori's fingers twitch, betraying his pain as Minato carefully twists, resets the bone, and then reheals. That is also useful, Hattori murmurs, an amused curl forming on the edge of his lips. Minato nods and rises to his feet, offering to help Hattori up. Hattori takes his hand and when both are standing Minato rubs the back of his neck. He's thinking of Tsunade when he says, "Not as useful as some others would be. I knew a woman who could heal some of the worst damage you could get. I can heal basic things and relieve pain. I'm going to try and improve though, considering you slayers don't have the luxury of medic ninja." Hattori nods, his mismatched eyes flitting over Minato before he gestures around them. "There a reason you are up before the sun?" Quote. Minato chuckles. "Same as you, I believe. I like to train in the morning before I help out the kids. My regimen is a bit more strict than theirs," he says sheepishly. Hattori nods and then looks at the field. "Well, I just finished forms but I would not mind a run. Care to join me through Sakonji's field of traps? We'll have to set them up after, but I'm sure we can manage that much between the two of us before the kids are supposed to wake up." Minato tilts his head, wondering what Hattori is referring to. Deciding it would be nice to have company, he agrees. He isn't quite sure what he got himself into. Sakonji, Minato decides, must have a partially sadistic bone in his body for all his calm composure. He dodges to fifth log trap of the trip, leaps over a pitfall, and has to add a touch of chakra to his steps to avoid the next. There's a rush of wind and his reflexes save him from being impaled by a sprung trap of knives. Hattori is about 50 feet further down the mountain from Minato, laughing as he angles his head back to watch Minato dodge Sakonji's traps. He is having a fine time himself, twisting and moving through the traps without a problem. Minato decides that the kid has done this before and just wanted to see his reaction. He feels his lips twitch and he quickly puts an end to the distance, weaving around traps as he goes. Sakonji has his kids run through this every morning? Minato asks in surprise. He would be worried, but he had noticed that the deadly traps weren't hidden nearly as well as they could be. Sakonji didn't seem like the type of person to be sloppy in Minato's eyes. Yes. He normally doesn't add sharp objects until later, but I think Mikomo does the run first, then the boys after she resets them. I like to make a run through whenever I find myself here in the morning just to get some variety to my training. I think Sakonji changes up the positions every so often too. I could never figure out how he dug a hole so fast. Minato blinks, eyes wide at the thought. Well, that explains some things. And while he didn't like the idea of kids Naruto's age doing things like this, he could admit that the training was needed. Shinobi often started training around the same time. Those suited for it entered the academy at age 6, leaving at age 12 or 13. They started weapons training in their 3rd year and the introduction to jutsu in their 5th. By their 6th-year academy, students were supposed to be able to perform the 3 basic jutsu, perform basic chakra control, showcase knowledge of their country and basic knowledge of others, and handle weapons adequately. Asking this much of kids was more than Konoha did, but probably a lot less than other countries asked of their academy students. In a world with man-eating demons that kids would soon be fighting? He could understand it, even if he didn't like it. He'd just have to make sure the kids were as prepared as they could be when the time inevitably came. At the very least, Minato was glad that the kids chose this path and weren't forced into it. He would lose it if any of the Hashira had forced one of the kids into this dangerous profession. He ducks a branch flying for his head and has to quickly replace himself with a log when a flurry of shuriken embed into the place he was. Hattori looks vaguely sheepish as he steps past a trigger. You need to focus, Minato, or you might end up a pincushion. Come on, race me to the bottom without using chakra. He says and dives further down the mountain. Minato shakes his head but feels elation run through him as he follows. He won't back down from a challenge, he is going to win. In the end, Minato pulls ahead after he drops his gravity seals. Hattori hadn't expected the sudden burst of speed as Minato wove through the last string of traps, his eyes focused on the goal ahead. They took a breather at the base of the mountain as Minato explained the seals to Hattori, who found them interesting. He agreed that Minato didn't cheat but still dragged the man up the mountain to rearm the traps. Minato took pity on them both and spawned a dozen clones for the task instead. He and Hattori armed a few, but the task was completed quickly with the aid of 12 other hands, and soon they were back at Sakonji's home. Minato's clones dispelled one at a time, each one's memories filed away carefully before the next dispelled. They arrived at the house to find Hiroko and Mikomo dressed for the day. Mikomo was still holding Hiroko's hand, the blonde helpless to follow her new friend. The smile on her face spoke enough about how she felt. "Good morning, Minato-san," say sensei, Mikomo intoned with an incline of her head. Hiroko came to a stop next to her and echoed her sentiments. Minato settled a hand on Hiroko's hair, ruffling it. The girl turned red but brightened more as he dropped his hand. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail today, though it seemed like she had done it in a rush. Hattori stepped closer to the girls, humming as he smiles at Mikomo. "Going to take Hiroko up the mountain?" he asks knowingly. At her nod, he chuckles. "Take care of her, Jigoro doesn't train the same way that Sakonji does," he warns and looks to Hiroko. The girl inclines her head and then shuffles to Mikomo. "I will, she'll be going with me after all," Mikomo says and then excuses herself as she tugs Hiroko along. The blonde happily follows. Hattori chuckles as he watches them go. Jigoro isn't getting her back without a fight, he tells Minato. Minato hums as a smile crosses his lips. Good, that'll give Jigoro time to think about how to approach the situation properly. It would probably also push Hiroko closer to the decision to go to final selection, but well, that was her choice. Minato hadn't wanted her to go, he still didn't. His talk with the master the day before had helped quell a good amount of his worry though. While unable to fully redo the system, Oyakata-sama had offered him the choice to also be in the final selection. He could save any of the kids there and send them back to the base of the mountain, and they would be instructed to return to their master for further training. The next final selection would adopt a much more cemented version of Minato's suggestions. They could work on it then. I think it's a good thing. They are quite similar and they will only strive to push each other to grow, Minato says, thinking about his wife and her own Mikomo. Makoto and Kushina were 2 years apart but they were inseparable. For all of the stipulations around the Uchiha, Makoto never cared to end her friendship with Kushina. They were terrors feared even across the elemental nations. They both urged one another to be stronger and work harder until one of them was a formidable kunoichi in Anbu, and the other was a walking army. Minato can only hope that Hiroko and Mikomo would be the same way. Good morning. A voice calls from behind and the adults turn to see Sakanji waiting for them at the front of the house. His arms are tucked into his sleeves, though he pulls one out to gesture inside. I have food prepared. They find themselves sitting at the table enjoying a fresh meal soon enough. Sakanji slides over a set of papers and Minato takes a moment to recognize it as a training regimen. I put Hiroko in with Mikomo and Kyojuro. Shinjuru's son should be able to keep up with them. As for Giyu and Sabito, I would like for them to start some of your shinobi training if you are willing. We can start your water breathing training tomorrow when I switch the boys over. Urokodaki intones as he points at the separate sheets. It's a solid regimen, Minato notes. Tailored mostly to the girls because of their flexibility. There are some minor strength training exercises, nothing terrible for Kyojuro but still just enough to help him. I can just make a clone to teach the boys. That way I can start on the breathing styles as soon as possible, Minato says. Hitori makes a sound suspiciously like a snicker. Oh, finally utilizing your abilities to their full potential? He teases, recalling the day before. Minato has the gall to look sheepish again. Well, I have them, and honestly I did forget that I could use them that way. He looks over to Sakanji and at his questioning air informs the water Hashira about shadow clones and their capabilities. Sakanji nods. That would be acceptable. Today we can start you with water breathing, and tomorrow Hitori can aid you in wind breathing. We will switch off like this until we deem you ready, Sakanji spoke. Minato nods, watching as Hitori rises to his feet. If that's the case, I'm going to go start patrolling. I take it you did around Sakanji, but I think it wouldn't be a bad idea if we swap off every day as well. Hitori tells him, grabbing his blade as he goes. He slings his haori over his shoulders and winks at Minato before he leaves. Noises are coming down the hall as he goes, a sure sign that Naruto and the boys are awake. Minato prepares himself just in time for Naruto to barrel into his side. Naruto tumbles into his lap, grinning and giggling. He's trying not to be loud but can't help it as he peers up at Minato. Kyojuro and Giyu leave the hall next, coming to sit down. Minato raises a brow at Kyojuro's pleased grin and Giyu's soft smile. It's when Sabito arrives that Minato realizes why his son is so happy. Sabito's hair is tugged into intricate braids. With a start, Minato recognizes the braids in the same way Hiroko sometimes does her hair. Sabito is grimacing, not liking the fact that his hair was touched. He hasn't fixed it yet though, which means he was likely threatened by the girls. Well, by Mikomo. Hiroko was probably roped into the mess by Naruto. Come and eat, Sakanji says. There's a teasing edge to his voice despite the lack of laughter, showcasing his enjoyment. Sabito grumbles but does as he's told. He glares at Kyojuro and Naruto over his bowl of rice. Minato smiles as Naruto settles in his lap and begins to eat the remnants of his father's food along with the new plate that Minato places in front of him. Sabito, Giyu, you will both be working with Minato today. Kyojiro, I'm going to be training you and Hiroko with Mikomo, Sakanji informs them. Kyojiro nods along with the other two boys. Naruto suddenly twists, looking up at Minato. "To-san, I'll be with Giyu and Sabito, right?" he asks with wide blue eyes. Minato tenses. "I don't think that's a good idea, Naruto." He starts, but doesn't get to finish because Naruto is now frowning. "But they are training?" he demands. Minato grimaces. He didn't want to have this conversation just yet. At the same time, he recognizes that he can hardly use Naruto's age after the boy just met Giyu and Sabito. He doesn't want to see his son fighting. He had watched too many small bodies fall on the field of battle and he never wanted to see them again. "Naruto," Minato murmurs, reaching down to cup his son's cheek. Naruto remains stubbornly fixated on him, eyes darkening the longer Minato takes. Minato glances over to Sakanji. It seemed like the water Hashira was right last night. Sakanji nods his head, flipping one of the papers on the table over. A lump settles in Minato's throat when he recognizes it as a start for Naruto. It's simple, but it would get him started with a wooden sword. Minato doesn't want to think about that. He doesn't have a choice. He sags and buries his face in Naruto's hair. "Okay," he murmurs even as he closes his eyes to hide his tears. Naruto's little arms wrap around his neck and the boy pulses his chakra. The ambient warmth that Naruto projects grows and Minato huffs a small laugh. "You can train with them, but don't overdo it. No metal, not until I say so." Naruto nods firmly, careful not to hit his head. They remain like that for just a moment longer before Naruto goes back to eating. Minato opens his eyes to find that the others at the table are trying not to stare. Giyu is failing miserably next to Minato. His blue eyes are peering between Minato and his son with something akin to fond longing. Minato reaches out and ruffles the kid's hair without a second thought. Damn his emotions, but kids deserve to be loved. They don't deserve to lose their family the way that these kids have, and if Minato can offer them even a fraction of the love they crave, he will. It seems like Hiroko and Kyojiro aren't the only kids Naruto's going to be around. Naruto grins at him happily and shifts, coming to sit next to the shocked Giyu as he happily chatters on about training. Giyu's eyes look strangely wet, but the boy smiles instead of crying. Sabito huffs at Minato's other side. Minato looks at him and his eyes twinkle with mischief as he leans over and flicks Sabito's forehead. The boy squawks and nearly tumbles over, huffing and glaring at Minato. His cheeks are red though as he goes back to eating. A soft smile is hidden behind his bowl. Minato smiles at the sight. He can still feel the tightness in his chest at the idea of Naruto training, but well, maybe he can learn to be okay with it. It is better than Naruto not being prepared. Sakanji waits until Hiroko and Mikomo get back before he sends Naruto with his other students. Minato would be worried, but he tells Naruto that if he needs to he can use his chains. Naruto gets excited and pumps his fist into the air before following Giyu and Sabito. Sabito pauses at Hiroko, huffing as he looks to the side. "Next time can you do something more manly?" he says, and his cheeks pink as Hiroko giggles. "I can, Sabito-kun," she says happily. He nods and leaves, ignoring the deadly look Mikomo sends his way as she smiles. Mikomo takes a seat next to Sakanji while Hiroko sits next to Minato. Minato notes she looks dirtier than before and has a few scrapes. He lifts his hand and heals the injuries. Hiroko thanked him, taking her hair from his ponytail before she grabbed her brush so she could fix it. It seemed she spent more time on Sabito's hair than her own and was seeking to rectify that. Minato offers his assistance and Hiroko hands him the brush. He calmly gets the new knots out, brushing her hair down her shoulders. It's longer than the other kids. Hiroko had told him that her mother had long hair too. She wanted to grow it out, but she was smart and kept it back or up when she was training. "Would you like me to braid it?" "I can try how my wife used to do it," Minato asks. Hiroko nods and he reaches around to tug the strands through his fingers. Kushina normally wore her hair down because she stayed in the village after the Kyuubi attack, but before that when she was on active duty Kushina kept her hair up. Fascinated with her red hair, Minato chose to learn how to braid and help her put it up just so he could admire it the whole time. Hiroko's hair was thicker than Kushina's though, and it took him a second to get the braid right on her head. He braided across the back of her head, gathering the strands into an intricate knot. It wouldn't be too heavy when training, but it wouldn't come undone either. "There, how's that?" Minato asks. Hiroko glances at him and then takes the kunai he offered to look into her reflection. She smiles softly. "I like it." "Thank you," she murmurs and then goes to put her brush away. "You know how to style hair, Minato-san?" Mikomo asks, her blue eyes surveying them. She quickly shifts next to Hiroko when the girl returns. "I learned from my wife. Kushina had beautiful long red hair and I wanted to know how to care for it. My sensei was also adamant about proper hair care because he wore his long, so some things just rubbed off on me," Minato answers her. He doesn't mention that he also learned in case his daughter ever wanted help with her hair. That wound is still too fresh to think about. Hiroko sets a hand on his, her green eyes peering up at him kindly. "Ka-san showed me how to braid hair too. The braid I used on Sabito is a traditional one." Minato turns his hand over to grip her smaller one gratefully. He turns to Sakanji when the man hums. "I've learned a few things from Mikomo and Giyu, considering they like their hair fairly long. Now, Mikomo, can you run Hiroko and Kyojuro through the first round of forms?" "I'm going to teach Minato to ask much as I can," Sakanji says as he rises from his spot. Mikomo nods and joins him in standing. Kyojuro comes next to the girls and follows them outside. Minato watches them go and steps in line with Sakanji as they head around the back of the house. "I take it you can set up your clones as needed?" Sakanji questions once they are outside. Minato nods and spawns two in for reference. The water Hashira nods sharply and sets into instructing Minato right away. Minato pays apt attention as Sakanji explains each of the forms first. There are 10 forms that focus on flow and flexibility. Sakanji walks Minato through each one, from the first form, water surface slash, to the 10th form, constant flux. Immediately Minato notices how this form is more similar to wind breathing if less unpredictable. He can see how water breathing would turn an enemy's strength against them if used right. Minato sets up 24 clones to practice the first form. He sets to work on it with Sakonji's careful eyes. It's easier to fall into the pattern of attacks with water breathing than thunder breathing. Even so, Minato masters the form just as quickly to Sakonji's surprise. When the boys arrive a few hours down the line, Minato heads to train them and leaves his clones in Sakonji's care. He has them on a cycle of dispelling and recreating new clones every half an hour to mitigate the memory backlash. Sakanji is decidedly impressed with Minato's quick deciphering and adjusting of the forms. His skills in taijutsu already established a basis for the forms that the kids didn't have, and his knowledge of kenjutsu allowed him to find what was most natural. Naruto is grinning brightly when Minato goes to the boys. He and Giyu look a little rough, while Sabito looks unharmed. The kids quickly fall into line as Minato instructs them on how to access their chakra. Naruto's ability to project his chakra helps. As proven with Shinjiro and the other Rengokus, the other Slayers in training can see his chakra around him. It helps them find the chakra inside as they pull it to the surface. Once they have managed that, Minato sets them to work on the trees the same way he did Kyojuro and Hiroko. They manage to run up the surface but struggle with maintaining their chakra. It takes a dozen falls before they even begin to go higher. Naruto spends the first few times cheering them on from above until Minato calls him to his side. Thinking about his training, Minato instructs Naruto on while the boys are attempting to run up trees. Naruto grins happily when he manages to complete the first task assigned to him. Minato smiles fondly and ruffles his hair before he tells him it's time to practice water walking. Water walking? How are you going to manage that without a running source nearby? Sakanji calls from behind. Minato glances over his shoulder and inclines his head. The same way I managed to create that wall of earth with Jigoro. Is there a spot you wouldn't mind a pond at? He asks with a grin. Sakanji hums and directs him away from the main area to a small clearing. Minato sets to work forming the pond, summoning the water from the moisture in the air and a fair amount of chakra. Naruto watches from behind his leg as his eyes sparkle in delight. Sakanji makes a noise of appreciation when Minato has finished. All right Naruto, let's get to work, nay? Minato says to his son. Naruto nods sharply and takes a tentative step on the surface. Minato comes behind him, his chakra rising to the surface as he pads along the water's edge. Sakanji has a sharp intake of breath. It was one thing to talk about walking on water, and another entirely to see it in action. The kids paused to look at them, their eyes zeroed in on Minato as he walked on water. Naruto's brow is furrowed and he closes his eyes as he concentrates on his father's chakra. Just like the leaf exercise, he mimics the flow of chakra and steps fully on the water. He's unsteadied and Minato reaches out to keep him from falling as Naruto takes the next few steps on the surface of the water. Naruto's feet are sinking and rising continually with each step, but he's grasping the content quickly. Minato can't help the proud smile crossing his lips as Naruto finally manages to settle on the surface. He turns his head up to Minato, and when he sees the fond smile he can't help but grin happily. "To-san, look!" Naruto cheers. Oh, Minato doesn't want his son to fight or be a killer. He doesn't want to look at Naruto and see a small and broken body. Oh, Minato doesn't want his son to fight or be a killer. He doesn't want to look at Naruto and see a small and broken body. He also can't help but be proud of his son. He can't help but see Kushina in his happy smile and his skill. Minato sees Naruto and he can't hide the pride radiating from him. Naruto yelps and Minato laughs as he catches his son partway in the water. Giyu and Sabito tumble to the ground again. Hiroko and Kyojuro are smiling as they spar on the trees and try to show Mikomo how to do the same. It's a good day. Drabble found. He really loves Yugara. A soft voice calls out, a gentle smile on the woman's lips. Gaara flushes darkly, his eyes on the small child tugging at his yukata. Tanjiro's bright red eyes are looking at him adoringly, the little boy never leaving his side. His dark red hair is splayed around his face and paints an adorable picture. Gaara holds wood in his hands from aiding Tanjiro with making charcoal. He had been stopped by the little boy when Tanjiro stumbled over to him. Kai smiles at him from where she is holding her rounded stomach. She's watching him and Tanjiro adoringly as she sews new clothes for the newest member of the family. Tanjiro tugs at Gaara's yukata again and the older boy offers him a hesitant smile. He had been scared at first, scared of these people and himself, but the Kamados were kind. The Kamados weren't afraid of him. Tanjiro was always at his side, hardly ever leaving him alone from the moment he ended up with the Kamados. Tanjiro was always making sure he was okay when he was feeling down. Kai was always showing him new things and letting him feel for little Nezuko. The voice in his head is strangely quiet here. It's almost content, enjoying the world. He had stopped hearing it as often long before this, but even now it's strangely silent. Gaara, you alright? Tanjiro calls as he walks over to where they are in front of the house. Kai is perched on the porch and sewing while Gaara is stopped next to her by Tanjiro. Gaara reaches down to pick up the wood he gathered but Tanjiro grabs it first. Go ahead and sit with Tanjiro. I think he wants your attention, Gaara. Tanjiro says softly, his smile never wavering. Gaara nods, his cheeks flushed with happiness as he takes a seat next to Kai. Immediately the toddler is climbing into his lap, making happy sounds as he giggles up at Gaara. There's something warm in his chest. Something so dangerously happy and he never wants to let it go. Gaara hugs Tanjiro the same way his uncle hugged him. He holds him close and swears he won't ever let anything happen to this little boy because he is family. Gaara never knew love until the Kamados. He didn't understand what it meant or how it felt to have a family, one that loved you unconditionally. He had been afraid, he had almost hurt Tanjiro. Despite that, the man had held him, comforted him, and told him he was loved. Despite only knowing Gaara for a few weeks, the man had given Gaara a chance. He'd die before he let anything happen to any of them. Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. My apologies for all those quotes. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See you next time, faves.